The sun filtered through the maple trees, casting golden confetti across the backyard. Laughter echoed from every corner, squeals, giggles, and the wild stomping of sugar-fueled feet on the freshly mowed grass. It was the kind of day Claire had dreamt of giving Hannah. Bright, loud, perfect. Hannah turned 6 that Saturday. There were pink balloons tied to fence posts and streamers twisting in the breeze like pastel serpents. A magician had just finished pulling a stuffed rabbit from an old top hat, and the children were still buzzing about it. Claire clutched a camera in one hand, trying to capture everything at once. Hannah in her sparkly dress, the cake shaped like a castle, the look of pride on her little girl's face. "I want to play hide-and-seek," Hannah squealed, twirling. Her brown curls bounced with each step. Claire chuckled, brushing crumbs from her jeans. "After cake, honey?" But Hannah was already off, grabbing 2 of her friends and running toward the garden. The last thing Claire saw was her daughter darting behind the lilac bush, trailing laughter like a ribbon. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Claire noticed the cake was untouched. "Hannah?" she called out, walking toward the side yard. The laughter had shifted, less playful now, more impatient. A few parents were calling their kids for juice boxes or hats. Claire walked faster. "Hannah, cake time." Nothing. She rounded the garden and peeked behind the lilac bush. Empty. "Maybe she's with Zoe," one of the mothers offered casually. Sipping punch, they were pretending to be fairies. Claire checked the playhouse, then the shed. Then the neighbor's fence line. Her pulse ticked faster. "Hannah!" she shouted now, louder, urgency creeping in. Children began to hush. A few looked at one another, confused. The energy shifted, first subtly, then sharply. Claire scanned the entire yard. Her heart thudded. "Where is she?" she muttered, as if repeating the question might produce an answer. It didn't. She checked the side gate. Still locked. Neighbors joined in. They fanned out down the street, calling her name. One father checked inside Claire's house. Another walked the alley behind the backyard. Claire's hands trembled as she clutched Hannah's favorite party crown, left abandoned on a patio chair. By the time the police arrived, 38 minutes after the 911 call, the backyard looked like a deflated carnival. Streamers had begun to sag. Balloons bobbed lifelessly. The laughter was gone. She was just playing hide-and-seek, Claire whispered to the responding officer, her voice cracking. 1 second she was here, and then she wasn't. Officer Ramirez, calm but firm, asked for a list of guests. Then he pointed to the backyard. "We'll start there." The search intensified. Officers swept the house and yard. Dogs were brought in. A helicopter buzzed overhead. Still. Nothing. No scream. No signs of a struggle. No forced entry. No trail through the grass. No indication of where a 6-year-old girl could have gone. In the space of a few minutes. Just absence. By sunset, Claire sat wrapped in a blanket on the back steps, staring at the lilac bush. Her phone buzzed relentlessly with questions, sympathy, theories. She answered none. Her hands were numb. The yard was now roped off with yellow tape. Neighbors stood in clumps on their lawns, whispering. The local news van had pulled up just as the forensics team arrived. Claire watched the sky turn violet. Her husband, Derek, hadn't called, but that wasn't surprising. He hadn't shown up either. He was 2 years gone and barely answered emails, let alone phone calls about birthdays. Still, a cold question had begun to form, quietly, inside her. Could he have? She shook the thought away. An officer approached. "Ms. Rivers, we're doing everything we can. We'll be canvassing house to house. We'll keep the press updated. But tonight I suggest you get some rest." Claire laughed, bitter. Broken sound. Rest? The officer hesitated. She might just be hiding. Sometimes kids do that when they're overwhelmed. She's 6. She was happy. She doesn't just vanish. He didn't argue. By midnight, most of the search team had cleared out. Only a few patrol cars remained. Claire lay awake on the couch, clutching the stuffed rabbit from the magic show. The silence was unbearable. It pressed against the windows. It stretched through the halls. She closed her eyes and tried to remember the exact moment Hannah disappeared, but there wasn't one. No final glance, no goodbye. Just A blur of pink, and then the world stopped spinning. Outside, the moonlight cast long shadows across the empty backyard. Behind the newly sagging fence, a figure watched from the tree line still, silent, unseen dot, and in the garden just beneath the lilac bush. A piece of pink ribbon fluttered in the breeze. The next morning, Claire stood barefoot on the damp grass, her arms folded tightly across her chest. The early sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft amber glow over the backyard that had, only yesterday, been filled with laughter. Now it felt foreign, eerily quiet, stripped of joy. Her eyes moved. From the collapsed, bouncy house to the half-eaten cake that still sat on the patio table, ants had found it. So had the wind. Pink frosting smeared across the plastic tablecloth like it was bleeding. I looked everywhere, she whispered to Officer Ramirez, who stood beside her, flipping through his notepad. In the house, under the porch, even the attic as ridiculous. As that sounds, Ramirez nodded. We've gone over it all too. No sign of forced entry, gate was locked, fence is secure. Is it? Claire interrupted. I mean, really? Ramirez paused. Well, it was. He motioned toward the far corner of the yard where two officers were kneeling near a thick cluster of bush. Claire followed, her breath catching when she saw it. There just, behind the lilac bush where Hannah had last been seen, was a narrow tear in the wooden fence. Not a full break, not large enough for an adult, but a board had clearly been loosened, and a jagged gap ran down its center. It was barely 2 feet wide. Splinters stuck out from the edges. The grass below had been slightly disturbed, as if something or someone had recently passed through. Claire crouched down and touched the broken board with trembling fingers. Was this here yesterday? We believe it happened that day, said one of the officers. Fresh damage. We didn't catch it in the dark. Claire stood, heart hammering in her chest. She could have slipped through? Ramirez looked. Grim, she could have been led through. Claire's eyes darted toward the woods beyond the fence. We don't hike back there. It's private property, a voice came from behind them. Not entirely. Claire turned to see Mr. Collins, her elderly neighbor from 2 doors down, stepping carefully across the yard with his cane. His eyes, watery but sharp, narrowed as he examined the broken fence. That side of the fence backs onto my brother's land. He doesn't live there anymore. Moved to Phoenix last year. House is still empty. Claire felt like the air had been knocked from her lungs. So someone could be squatting there, watching? Collins shrugged. Wouldn't be the first time someone used those woods as a shortcut. Officer Ramirez exchanged a glance with his team. We'll check the property. Immediately. Claire tried to focus, but her thoughts blurred again, spiraling back to the moment, the exact second when she realized Hannah was gone. 1 minute. Her daughter had been chasing Bubbles with Zoe and Ava. The next, Claire was holding a knife. Over the birthday cake, calling her name, and all she heard was wind. The knife had slipped in her hand. She hadn't even noticed the blood. She never wandered, Claire whispered, almost to herself. Even when she was younger. She always stayed close, Ramirez nodded. Which suggests she trusted whoever let her out. Claire looked at him sharply. You think it was someone she knew? Possibly. There were no signs of struggle. And we're looking into all the guests. Anyone who might have come and gone without being noticed. Claire closed her eyes, the names running through her head like a checklist. Friends, classmates, parents, acquaintances. She didn't even know some of them. People brought cousins, older siblings. She'd barely had time to keep track. Ramirez flipped another page in his notebook. You mentioned your ex-husband, Derek. Was he invited? She hesitated. No, but Hannah asked about him. She hadn't seen him in months. I didn't think he wouldn't. Still, Ramirez said gently, we'd like to speak with him. Claire nodded. Her stomach turned at the thought of hearing Derek's voice again, let alone seeing him. But if there was even a sliver of possibility... From the yard's edge, an officer called out, waving something in the air. A piece of pink fabric, torn, muddy, stuck to a branch just beyond the gap in the fence. Claire's knees gave slightly. Ramirez steadied her. We're going to find her, he said, though his voice lacked conviction. She didn't respond. Her Eyes were fixed on that ribbon, bright, delicate, unmistakably Hannah's. A breeze carried the sound of rustling leaves beyond the fence. The woods swayed, indifferent, and somewhere far off a dog barked, once, then silence. Claire sat at the dining table, staring at a half-drunk mug of coffee gone cold. The pink ribbon, the one found near the broken fence, lay on the table like a silent accusation. Her hands hovered above it, but never touched. Officer Ramirez had promised to follow every lead. Still, hours had passed with no news. No calls. Just silence and a few murmured updates from officers, still moving between the woods and her backyard. Then the knock came. She opened the door to Zoe's mother, Paige, clutching her phone with both hands and wearing a face caught between guilt and urgency. Claire, I didn't think it mattered, but I was going through the photos from yesterday, and Claire's heart skipped. Photos? I took a bunch during the party, mostly of the girls, the decorations, you know. But in one of them, in the background, near the fence. She trailed off, swallowing hard. Claire reached for the phone. Paige hesitated, then handed it over. The photo showed Hannah mid-laugh, frosting on her cheek, running with two other kids. In the distance, just beyond the lilac bush, was a figure, not clearly visible. Just a partial silhouette, but something about the angle. The way the head was turned slightly toward the camera. Claire zoomed in, the image pixelated, but the figure remained distinguishable enough to ignite her gut instinct. A man, facing the fence, standing near the place where the broken slat had been discovered. His upper body mostly hidden by shadow and leaves. But not his shoes. They were black and worn, with a specific white stripe on the side shoes she had seen hundreds of times before. Her hands went cold. Claire? Paige asked, watching her face. I know those shoes. You do? They're Derek's, Claire's ex-husband. Hannah's father, the very man who hadn't answered her call, who had refused to see Hannah for nearly 8 months, who claimed he was working on himself. Whatever that meant, she hadn't mentioned him to the police beyond saying he was uninvolved. But now the image burned in her hand. I need to show this to Ramirez, Claire said. Already grabbing her keys. At the station, the air was thick with motion phones ringing. Officers moving in and out of rooms, printers spitting out files. Claire handed the phone over to Ramirez in silence. He examined the photo, frowned, and called over a tech who took the phone and disappeared down the hall. You're sure it's him? Ramirez asked. I'm not guessing. I bought him those shoes 2 Christmases ago. He wore them every time he picked up Hannah. Ramirez nodded slowly. Do you have a recent address for him? Claire hesitated. Not really. He said he moved apartments. Last I knew he was staying near Winston Avenue, but I think he lost that place. Ramirez scribbled something in his notebook. We'll find him, Claire paced. You think he took her? I think we follow every thread, especially when it leads to someone with access. He hasn't even called, she whispered. Not even after the news broke. What kind of father doesn't call? The tech returned. We ran enhancement, best we could. It's not definitive, but the height and build match. Shoes are consistent. We're pulling DMV records now. Ramirez turned to Claire. We'd like you to give a formal statement. Then we'll issue a locate on Derek Rivers. She nodded, barely hearing. That night, Claire sat in her darkened living room, staring at Hannah's drawings taped to the fridge, unicorns, flowers, a picture of a family stick figures with smiling faces, Claire, Hannah, and between them, Derek. Claire clenched her jaw. The last time Hannah had seen him, she came home crying. Daddy said you don't want him around anymore. She'd said through hiccups. He'd poisoned her with guilt even as he drifted further away. What had changed? Was this revenge or something darker? Her phone buzzed. An unknown number. She picked it up, heart racing. Claire. She froze, that voice. Derek? A pause. I saw the news about Hannah. Claire's pulse roared in her ears. You think calling now makes you look innocent? I didn't do anything, I swear to God. You were at the party? I have a picture of you by the fence. Another pause. He exhaled. Claire, I swear I wasn't there to hurt anyone. I just wanted to see her. Just watch for a minute. I wasn't invited, remember? You weren't supposed to be near her at all. I know. But I didn't take her. I walked away when things got loud, I swear. Claire felt the rage rise inside her. If you know anything, now is the time to speak. I don't, he said softly. But if someone took her, it wasn't a stranger. She wouldn't have gone with someone she didn't know. The line went dead. Claire stood frozen, the silence humming in her ears. She didn't know what was more terrifying, what Derek had said, or what he hadn't done in the next room. The porch light flickered once, and somewhere, in a camera's blurred image, a shadow waited to be identified. Claire didn't sleep that night. Derek's voice echoed in her head, each word heavier than the last. If someone took her, it wasn't a stranger. The message kept playing over and over, as if the answer to everything was buried somewhere in his tone. She replayed. The photo in her mind, the dark outline near the fence, the shoes she couldn't forget, and yet, his voice, calm, controlled, too calm. Morning. Officer Ramirez confirmed Derek had been located at a motel on the edge of town, alone, cooperative. He's agreed to come in, Ramirez told her. We'll question him formally today. Claire arrived at the station just as Derek was being led down the corridor. He looked thinner than she remembered, older. But the arrogance was still there. Tucked just beneath his slouch, he met her eyes only briefly. They placed him in interview. Room B. Claire waited in the observation room behind the mirrored glass, arms folded tight. Ramirez entered the room with another officer and sat across from Derek. I didn't take her, Derek said immediately. Let's just get that out of the way. No one said you did, Ramirez replied evenly. But we have questions. I know. I saw the photo. It's me, okay? I was there, but not like that. Ramirez opened his notebook. Why were you at the party uninvited? Derek shrugged. I just wanted to see her. I didn't get an RSVP. Claire didn't respond to my texts. I figured I'd swing by, just from a distance. You were near the fence where she disappeared. I didn't know that would happen. I didn't take her. I missed her. Claire watched through the glass, every muscle in her body clenched. You didn't try to talk to her? Ramirez asked. No, I stayed hidden. Didn't want to cause a scene. Then why did you run when things got loud? Derek hesitated. Because I knew how it'd look. And let's be honest, Claire would have blamed me no matter what. Claire flinched at that. She didn't need to be in the room to feel the barb. Ramirez leaned in. Why should we believe you? Because I know what it looks like when someone's planning something, and this wasn't me. Claire might think I'm a screw-up, but I'm not a monster. Ramirez watched him for a long moment, then stood. We're not ruling anything out. Stay available. Derek didn't reply. Later, Claire waited outside the station as Derek exited the building. He noticed her, paused, then walked over. I didn't expect to see you, he said. Claire didn't move. You showed up, you watched her, then she disappeared. I didn't touch her, he snapped, then softened. I know I've messed things up. I was never good at any of it. But I loved her. Claire's voice trembled. You loved control. You loved fear. You hit walls, Derek. You scared her. She never said that. She didn't have to. She flinched when you raised your voice. He looked away. I was angry, lost, but I didn't take her, I swear. She hated how his voice still made her question herself. That was his power. Always had been. I didn't report the things you did, she said quietly. Not once. Not to the court. Not to her teachers. I wanted her to have a father. And I wanted a second chance, but you locked me out. You gave me no choice. They stood in silence for a moment, cars passing on the road behind them. Then he said it quiet, but sharp. If someone took her, it was someone you let in. Claire blinked. What's that supposed to mean? Derek stepped back. I didn't take our daughter, but someone at that party did. Someone you trusted? He turned and walked away, leaving Claire standing in the wind. That night, Claire sat on Hannah's bed. The room was still full of her. Stuffed animals lined the shelves. Books scattered across the floor. The fairy lamp cast soft pink light. On the walls, Claire picked up a drawing from the bedside table. Hannah and Claire holding hands, stick figures with big hearts. She turned it over. On the back, written in Hannah's wobbly letters, was a single word, Daddy? Her chest ached. She had wanted to protect her daughter, shield her from the cycle. Claire herself had grown up in yelling, slammed doors, tears that dried without comfort. But had she done enough? Had she ignored signs because they were too painful? Her thoughts spiraled. Derek was manipulative, but he hadn't taken her. Claire could feel it in her bones. He was cruel, but not quiet. Not clever. If he'd taken Hannah, there'd have been noise, signs, a confrontation. This was stealth. Deception. Patience. She rose from the bed, heart pounding. If it wasn't Derek. Then someone had used her party, her child's party, as a hunting ground. And worse, someone had been close enough to know how. The seasons blurred, the bright pink balloons tied to Hannah's birthday chair rotted away under rain and sun, their remnants clinging to rusted staples on the old wooden fence. That fence, the one with the tier, was long gone now, replaced by a new, taller one. But Claire still saw the hole every time she looked outside. Every morning she opened the curtains and searched for her daughter's shadow in the backyard, but there was only stillness. The police had followed leads for months. A woman in New Mexico claimed to have seen a child that looked like Hannah at a truck stop, but surveillance footage turned up nothing. A tip in Idaho led to a storage unit, but inside was only rotting furniture and mouse droppings. The blurry photo of the shadowy man near the fence had been analyzed, enhanced, dissected, but the image always stopped at the shoes, and Derek had an alibi, solid, undeniable, a receipt, a friend's testimony, even a time-stamped video from a bar over 100 miles away. Claire had watched it herself, heart clenched. He was drinking, laughing, not snatching a child in the dark. The camera had lied, or her eyes had. After a year, the detective stopped calling as often. "We're still looking," Officer Ramirez would say kindly, but with an edge of finality that Claire hated. She stopped answering after year 2. She changed her number after year 3. Year 4 arrived. Like a cruel whisper, her house began to decay in tandem with her mind. The fridge emptied itself without her noticing. Mornings turned to nights without meals. She would wake up in Hannah's bed, holding her pillow so tightly her fingers would cramp. Sometimes she screamed into it. Sometimes she whispered stories into it like she used to at bedtime, the neighbors whispered. Some moved away. Others stayed, avoiding her eyes when they passed her mailbox. Claire didn't blame them. She had become the woman no one wanted to greet. The woman whose child vanished from her own yard and never came back, and then Nora moved in. Claire first noticed her on a windy Tuesday, just after dusk. She heard the thumping of car doors and walked to her porch, barefoot in her robe. A slender woman with auburn hair was hauling a box labeled "Fragile" toward the front steps of the house next door. Claire offered no wave, just watched in silence. The woman paused, caught her stare, and smiled. A soft, cautious smile that didn't linger too long. The next morning, a knock. Claire opened the door to find a paper plate full of warm banana muffins and a handwritten note. "Hi, I'm Nora. No pressure to talk. Just wanted to say hello." Claire didn't eat the muffins at first. They sat on the counter for 2 days. But on the third night, as rain tapped against the windows and loneliness gnawed at her, she took one and cried as she chewed. Their conversations began slowly, brief chats at the mailbox. Then longer talks on the porch, coffee in hand. Nora didn't ask about Hannah, not once. That was how Claire knew she had Googled it already. "I used to be a nurse," Nora said one evening. "Moved around a lot. Thought maybe it was time to put down roots." Claire nodded. "Why this street?" she asked, eyes fixed on the horizon. Nora sipped her tea. "Just felt quiet, like a place where things could start again." Claire almost laughed. But instead she nodded again. The house next door bloomed under Nora's care. Flower beds appeared, chimes hung from her porch. She planted sunflowers along the fence that divided their yards, and they stretched tall and golden as if trying to look into Claire's world. Sometimes Claire found herself leaning into the fence, listening. For what? She didn't know. But she felt something in Nora, some strange warmth that didn't burn, just simmered quietly. A kindness too perfect. Your yard is beautiful, Nora said one afternoon. Unprompted, Claire blinked at the weeds and scattered leaves. It's not, she replied. Nora smiled. Not now, maybe. But I can see what it used to be. That night, Claire dreamed of Hannah again. Not the usual nightmare, but a memory, her giggle. Her tiny fingers grabbing frosting off the cake. Her chasing butterflies in the grass. Pink dress catching the wind. She woke up crying. As winter approached, Claire noticed something odd. Nora spent a lot of time in her backyard shed. Late into the evening, tools clanked, lights glowed. Once, Claire thought she heard soft humming. She told herself it was nothing. Everyone had hobbies, but her instincts twitched. Then came the 6th anniversary. Claire didn't bake a cake, didn't light a candle. She sat on the porch with a blanket, and Nora brought 2 mugs of cider. I'm sorry, Nora whispered. For everything you've carried? Claire said nothing, just stared at the backyard. The fence. The patch of earth where Hannah used to play. A moment later, a strange sound interrupted the silence. Scratching. Low and frantic. Claire stood. It was coming from behind the fence. Near the corner, Nora looked over, her eyes unreadable. Claire's heart pounded. It was Max, her dog, digging hard. And that's when something flickered inside. Her hope or dread. 6 years, that's how long it had been since Hannah disappeared from the yard with the pink balloons and the butterfly cake. Since Claire's world had gone quiet, not from the absence of sound, but from the absence of her. Time had moved on, but Claire hadn't. She still left the porch light on every night. Still kept Hannah's bedroom untouched, still imagined. Her laughter echoing across the backyard, but the yard wasn't the same anymore. The old wooden fence, once splintered and frail, had long since been replaced with solid cedar planks. Taller, stronger. A fortress Claire had convinced herself would keep the world out or keep her guilt in. On the other side, Nora's manicured garden bloomed year-round. Claire used to find peace in its beauty, but lately that peace was unraveling, and it began with Rufus. He was a rescue. A wiry German shepherd mixed with more scars than manners. Claire wasn't looking for a dog, but something about Rufus. His haunted eyes, the way he paced in his kennel like he was searching for someone, mirrored her own emptiness. She brought him home last fall. At first, Rufus was gentle, quiet, observant, but lately he'd become restless. He'd pace along the back fence, tail stiff, nose pressed to the dirt. Sometimes he'd growl low under his breath, a sound Claire had never heard from him before. Other times he'd dig like a demon, his claws ripping into the earth as though something were buried deep beneath. Claire had tried to stop him. She filled the holes with soil, planted azaleas, even sprayed vinegar. But Rufus kept returning to the same spot, the far corner where the fence met Nora's yard. That night, the storm rolled in fast, like they always did in early spring. Thunder growled overhead as rain fell in wild sheets, battering windows, and drowning out every other sound. Claire was in the kitchen when she noticed Rufus missing. She called his name, but only the wind answered. Grabbing her flashlight, Claire threw on her raincoat and stepped into the yard. The wind slapped her hair across her face. The porch light flickered behind her as she sloshed across the flooded grass, calling again, "Rufus, come, boy." A sharp bark cut through the rain, short, frantic. It was coming from the fence. Claire's boots sank into the mud as she ran toward him. The beam of her flashlight caught the glint of his eyes. He was soaked, half covered in dirt, his muzzle streaked with something dark. And he was digging again, faster than she'd ever seen him. "Rufus, stop!" But the dog didn't stop. He let out another bark and lunged forward with his front paws, throwing up a spray of mud. Something caught the light. Claire froze. A hint of pink, kneeling beside him. Claire shoved Rufus gently aside. Her hands trembled as she pulled at the wet soil. The scent of earth and decay filled her nose. Her fingers closed around fabric, soft, fragile, soaked through. Pink tulle. Claire's breath caught. The world went silent. She pulled harder, revealing more, layers of fabric tangled together, dirt-stained ribbons, and a single glittering butterfly stitched into the hem. Her mind reeled. It couldn't be. But it was Hannah's birthday dress. Claire rocked back on her heels, clutching the sodden fabric to her chest as the rain poured down. Lightning lit up the yard in a harsh white flash. She looked at the spot again. The hole Rufus had dug, the disturbed soil, the way the dress had been so carefully wrapped and hidden. This wasn't random. Someone had buried it here. Just feet from where Hannah had vanished. She stumbled to her feet, nearly slipping. Her heart thundered louder than the storm. She didn't even realize she was crying until she tasted salt on her lips. Behind her, a light flicked on in Nora's house. Claire froze. A shadow moved behind the curtain upstairs, tall, slow, watching. The fabric in Claire's arms felt heavier now, a weight, a memory. A message. Rufus whimpered, his body pressed tight against her leg. Claire turned and walked back toward the porch, her fingers gripping the dress so tightly her knuckles went white. The wind howled louder, as if screaming a truth she had buried for too long. This wasn't over. Not even close. The pink tulle dress sat folded inside a police evidence bag, sealed and tagged. Claire stood behind the yellow crime scene tape, her arms wrapped tightly around her chest as though trying to hold her entire body together. The early morning light had broken through the clouds, casting a strange gold hue over the yard. As if the universe didn't know whether to mourn or breathe, Detective Morrow stood to her left, scribbling notes while officers measured, photographed, and examined every inch of the site Rufus had unearthed the night before. The hole had been widened, marked with stakes and flags, the soil sifted carefully under a plastic tarp. A canopy had been set up to shield the operation from fresh drizzle. Claire didn't speak. Her eyes never left the spot. She watched as the officers gently paused, exchanged glances, and crouched low. One of them raised his hand and signaled. They had found something. Claire's knees weakened. 2. Forensic techs dropped to the ground with gloved hands and small brushes. Claire felt her breath catching, her ears ringing with the kind of silence that screams louder than thunder. An officer stepped away from the hole, his face pale. A moment later, a child-sized skeleton was lifted out of the shallow grave. The remains were cradled in a body bag as if they still deserved the dignity of gentleness. The small bones had been partially preserved by the damp earth. Atop the skull sat something garishly out of place. A plastic tiara, its pink jewels dulled by soil but unmistakable. Claire collapsed to her knees. The cry that escaped her chest was something ancient, the kind of sound only mothers make when the impossible becomes real. When hope dies a second death. She wore that tiara all day, she whispered, staring at the fragile crown. It was her favorite part of the whole party. Detective Morrow crouched beside her. We'll get the DNA results as fast as possible, but I want you to prepare yourself, Claire. Everything lines up. Claire nodded. She didn't need a lab. She already knew it was Hannah, the child she had searched for in alleyways, fields, abandoned houses. The child she had dreamed of hearing call Mommy again. The child whose birthday was supposed to end with cake and presents. Not a grave behind a fence. As Tex carried the remains away, Claire remained frozen, clutching the railing of the back deck. She hadn't even noticed Nora approaching until she felt a hand on her shoulder. I'm so sorry, Nora whispered. Her voice cracked, hoarse and raw. Her eyes were red and swollen. I can't believe this was here, all this time. Right next door. Claire turned to her slowly. Nora looked devastated. Her face was streaked with tears. But Claire's gaze dropped, not to her friend's trembling lips, but to her hands. They were shaking. Badly. Too. Badly. Claire blinked. Nora wasn't shivering from the cold. Claire could see the sweat on her temples, even in the drizzle. Her fingers twitched, clutched, unclutched, like someone struggling to hold back a surge of panic. I thought she was taken, Nora murmured. Kidnapped. We all did. Claire didn't respond. She stared at those trembling hands, remembering the late-night visits, the shared wine, the stories about their daughters. The way Nora had always been so involved in Hannah's life, more than most neighbors. The way she had cried more than anyone else at the vigil, the way her house had, always had a view of Claire's backyard. She was just so full of life, Nora continued. Always skipping, always laughing. That tiara, I still remember her. Spinning in it. Claire's jaw tensed. So many memories. So many moments. All reframed now. Thank you for being here, Claire finally said, her voice steady but flat. Nora gave a shaky nod. Of course, I'll stay with you. However long you need. Claire forced a smile, but her heart was racing. Something felt wrong. Something had always felt slightly off, the late-night glances, the over-helpfulness, the hollow comfort, the shaking hands. She watched Nora walk back across the yard to her own porch. Claire's eyes stayed on her the whole way. Behind her, Detective Morrow's voice cut through the mist. We'll be back tomorrow for a more thorough search. I have a feeling this yard isn't done talking yet. Claire didn't answer. She simply stared at the fence. She knew now that the truth hadn't just been buried in dirt, it had been buried in friendship, and something about Nora's hands told her the next revelation would be even worse. The morning after the discovery behind the fence was eerily silent. No police sirens, no chatter. Just the weight of reality pressing down on Claire like a soaked blanket. Hannah was gone, confirmed. The plastic tiara still clutched between gloved fingers had broken something in her. Yet, it wasn't just grief blooming in her gut. Now it was suspicion. Nora had cried too hard. Her sobs didn't feel real. And those hands shaking, twitching like nerves, were splintering under pressure. Claire hadn't slept. She sat on her porch wrapped in a blanket, eyes glued to the crooked line where her fence met Nora's. She barely registered the knock on her door until the second time. Officer Ramirez stood there, face pale but resolute. We have enough for a search warrant, he said. Claire didn't ask what they were looking for. 2 black and whites rolled in quietly, followed by an unmarked SUV. Officers surrounded Nora's house. Claire watched from her front steps, numb, while Nora, wearing slippers and a robe, opened the door and blinked against the morning light. Is this about the girl? She asked, her voice trembling. We need you to step aside, ma'am. She didn't protest. She stepped aside like someone who already knew the ending. Claire couldn't help it. She crossed the lawn. Barefoot, still in pajamas. She wanted to see. Needed to see. Inside, Nora's house smelled of cinnamon and artificial flowers. It looked normal. Cozy even, a well-lived life. Framed pictures of Emily, Nora's teenage daughter, hung on the walls. School portraits. Dance recital. Nothing out of place, but the basement door was different. Heavy, reinforced, and locked from the outside. Ramirez signaled to another officer, who used bolt cutters to snap the chain. The door creaked open, stale air wafted out, tinged with mildew and something else, like damp wood and chalk dust. Claire's breath caught. The stairs were narrow and steep. At the bottom, a single bulb flickered overhead. The basement was mostly empty boxes, an old dresser, water stains on the concrete. But against the far wall was another door, smaller, painted pink. It looked. Officers approached carefully. This one wasn't locked. It creaked open, revealing a cramped room no larger than a walk-in closet. Claire stepped forward. Against Ramirez's warning, inside the walls were covered in drawings. Crayons had stained every inch. Smiley faces, stick figures, suns, flowers. A poorly drawn cake with 6 candles. Her hand flew to her mouth. In the center of the room sat a tiny, rusted bed frame with no mattress. A single pink blanket lay folded neatly. There were toys, 2 stacked blocks, a plastic doll with one eye missing, but it was the wall scribble that turned. Claire's blood cold, scrawled in red crayon above the bed. Mom sighed to stay quiet. Her knees buckled. Ramirez caught her before. She fell. Is this? She whispered, but the words didn't come. They didn't have to. The room hadn't been touched in years. Dust caked the floor. But beneath that dust, tiny footprints still lingered, like ghosts refusing to be forgotten. Officers fanned out, documenting everything. Upstairs, Nora sat on her couch, rocking slightly. Claire hovered near her. Why? She asked, her voice hoarse. Nora didn't look up. I tried to stop him. I really did. Claire blinked. Stop who? Just then the front door opened. A girl stood there, maybe 15. Pale, wide-eyed Emily. She froze when she saw the officers. Her eyes darted to her mother. Mom? Claire stared at the girl, something catching in her memory. Emily looked familiar. Not just in her face, but in her posture, the tilt of her head. Ramirez turned to Claire. You should go. We'll question them both. But Claire couldn't move, not until she heard it. Is she okay? Emily asked. Claire's breath caught. Who? Emily's lip trembled. The girl in the pink dress. Gasps filled the room. Nora broke into sobs. Ramirez's jaw tightened. Emily? What girl? Emily looked at the floor. I wasn't supposed to talk about her. Claire felt like the air had been sucked from her lungs. She lived in the pink room. Emily whispered. Claire stepped back. This wasn't over. Not yet. Claire sat in the dim interview room, her eyes fixed on the one-way glass on the other side. Emily sat hunched in a chair too large for her, sleeves pulled over her hands as if the fabric could protect her from the memories she was about to share. The detectives gave her space, allowing the silence to work its way under her skin. It didn't take long. My mom used to tell me not to make noise at night, Emily began, voice almost inaudible. She said some kids are bad and they need timeouts in special places. Detective Ramirez leaned forward gently. What special places, Emily? Emily's lips quivered. The basement. But I wasn't allowed down there after Hannah came. Claire's breath caught in her throat. Her hands trembled on the table, knuckles white, heart crashing in her chest. I didn't know who she was at first, Emily continued. She was small, scared. She had a tiara in her hair. I thought she was playing princess. There was a long pause, filled only by the faint hum of the overhead light. They said it was a game, Emily whispered. Derek told her that if she won, she could go home. But she never won. Claire's knees weakened. Derek. His name felt like broken glass in her mouth. For years she had defended herself against doubts, against guilt. Now everything snapped into place like a cruel jigsaw puzzle. She used to cry for her mom, Emily said, eyes pooling. I thought she was just pretending. But then the crying stopped. What did your mom say when you asked about her? Ramirez asked. Emily looked down at her shoes. She said Hannah had gone home, that she'd only stayed for a while. But then she burned the mattress in the backyard. And she painted over the walls. Ramirez's eyes met Claire's through the glass. This wasn't just childlike imagination. This was memory hardened by fear and buried under years of silence. Claire stepped out of the observation room, but the words clung to her skin like damp ash. She could still hear them in Emily's trembling voice. She used to cry for her mom. Inside the room, Emily began to speak again. I saw Derek again, once. He came at night after they stopped locking the basement. He didn't look at me. He just gave Mom an envelope. She cried after he left. What was in the envelope? Ramirez pressed. I don't know. But after that, Mom got worse. She'd sit outside with her wine and stare at the fence. She said she was a good person, that people make mistakes. Claire felt her jaw tighten. Nora had brought her tea, listened to her stories, hugged her in the kitchen while the world collapsed, all while knowing. Did your Mom and Derek ever talk about Claire? Ramirez asked gently. Emily hesitated. They said she'd forget. That people like her always move on? That no one would believe someone like him, and no one would question someone like her. Claire blinked hard. Someone like me. Single mother, isolated, grieving, easy to gaslight, easier to ignore. Emily shifted in her chair. I used to hear them fight. She said he should have taken Hannah somewhere else. He said she begged to stay. That she cried so much he didn't know what else to do. A beat of silence passed. But my mom, Emily's voice cracked. She wanted Hannah to be mine, a sister, she said, a secret sister. But I didn't want that. I didn't want to play anymore. Tears now slipped freely down Claire's cheeks, each one carving a new trail through her numbness. She leaned against the wall for balance. She made me help bury the dress, Emily confessed. Said it was part of a goodbye ritual. Sighed. It would keep her spirit at peace. But I knew it wasn't right. Ramirez's voice softened. Emily, why didn't you tell anyone? I was scared. She said if I told, I'd disappear too. That defense worked both ways. Claire could no longer stand there. She turned and walked out of the hallway, heart pounding in her ears, nausea curling in her gut. Nora and Derek, the two people she had once loved in different lifetimes. Woven together by something monstrous, outside the rain had started again. Rufus sat by the fence, tail still as stone, eyes fixed on the earth like he was waiting for it to speak again. Claire looked back toward the house next door, the basement. The drawings, the lies. Everything was unraveling, but something still didn't fit. If Hannah had died in the basement 6 years ago, who else had Nora kept there? Because Emily had said something else? Something she almost whispered. She wasn't the only one who stayed quiet. The knock on Derek's door came just after sunset. The sky was bruised with purple clouds, and a warm wind swept leaves across the porch. Claire stood still, her hands trembling at her sides. She hadn't seen him in years, not since the investigation went cold, not since she stopped believing he would ever pay for what he did. Now she had Emily's words, Hannah's tiara, and the look on Nora's face when the ground gave up its secret. She had enough. The door opened. Derek stood in the frame, older now, his hair thinning, his once broad shoulders slumped under a sweatshirt. His new wife's voice echoed from inside. Who is it, honey? Claire stepped forward. It's me. We need to talk. His eyes widened. Claire? She didn't wait for permission. She brushed past him into the hallway, ignoring. The neatness of the suburban home, the scent of lavender air freshener that clung to everything. It was too clean, too distant from the rot he carried. He followed her, his face pale. I know, she said, turning to face him in the living room. I know about you and Nora. I know what you did. Derek's mouth opened, but no words came. Claire pulled her phone from her coat pocket and tapped the record button without a word. I want to hear you say it, she said, her voice quivering. I want you to say what you did to our daughter. He backed into the couch, collapsed onto it like the weight of the truth had finally become too much. He buried his face in his hands. The silence stretched until it snapped. I didn't mean for it to go that far, he whispered. It wasn't supposed to happen like that. Claire didn't blink. Then what was it supposed to be? She wouldn't stop crying, he said, his voice breaking. Nora said she just needed time. To adjust, she said Hannah reminded her of the daughter she never had. But that night, he looked up, tears glistening in his eyes. She lost it. Hannah was screaming. I tried to stop her, I swear, Claire. I tried, but Nora, she was always so intense. When she got like that, there was no reasoning with her. She just kept saying the girl needed to be quiet, just for one night. Claire took a step closer. So you let her take our daughter? You stood by while she locked Hannah in a basement like a secret. I thought it would only be a few hours, Derek sobbed. Just until the party ended. Nora told me you'd never let me see Hannah again. She said if I helped her, maybe we could raise her together. The words twisted Claire's stomach. A dull roar filled her ears. She died in that basement, Claire said softly. Buried behind the fence where her dog found her 6 years later. Do you know what that does to a mother? Derek's body shook. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry, Claire. You don't get to say that, she hissed, but she didn't scream. She didn't hit him. She didn't collapse the way she thought she would. Instead, she pressed stop on her phone, saved the recording, and turned for the door. As she stepped into the cool evening air, her heart thundered, not with vengeance, but with something colder resolve. The truth had sat buried for years, waiting for someone brave enough to uncover it. Now that someone was her, the moment she stepped off the porch, red and blue lights flashed at the end of the cul-de-sac. She had already sent the confession to Officer Ramirez. This wasn't over. Not yet, not until justice crawled out of the dark like Hannah's dress. Wrapped in mud and faced the light, the courthouse steps were gray with rain, though the sky had cleared. A soft drizzle lingered on the concrete like a memory that refused to dry. Claire stood beneath a dull umbrella, her coat soaked through at the shoulders. Watching as Nora was led down the steps in shackles, there were no reporters, no crowd. Just quiet justice unfolding the way most long-delayed reckonings do, not with fury, but with exhausted finality. Inside, the sentencing had been brief. Nora had pleaded guilty, her voice trembling as she admitted to unlawful imprisonment and involuntary manslaughter. The judge didn't look at her when handing down the sentence, 25 years with no possibility of parole. Derek's trial would follow, but he'd already been charged as an accessory. His confession, recorded on Claire's phone, had sealed his fate. Claire hadn't cried, not in the courtroom. Not when Nora described Hannah's final moments. Not when Derek looked at her with eyes full of regret, but she cried now, not loud, not broken, but the kind of tears that moved quietly down her cheeks like rain slipping down glass. The kind that knew nothing could truly make it right. She made her way down the street, past shops preparing to close for the evening, past the flower stand where she used to buy Hannah a daisy on Fridays. The world moved on, unaware of the storm that had just broken inside her. The cemetery was still damp, the earth dark and soft. A low fog hung around the stones like a veil. Claire found the path without needing to look. She'd memorized it long ago. Hannah's grave was simple. A white headstone with her name, the dates etched gently into the surface. Loved forever, it read below. But Claire had brought something more today. She knelt slowly, her knees sinking into the wet ground. In her hands was the tiny, dirt-stained tiara they had found behind the fence, still bent from time, still holding traces of glitter. She ran her thumb across it like a relic, something sacred. "I'm sorry," she whispered. The wind rustled. The trees overhead, I should have seen it. I should have known something was wrong. Her voice cracked. "You were trying to tell me, weren't you? All those nights you clung to me, afraid to go to your dad's. I should have listened." She placed the tiara gently at the base of the headstone. "I thought I was keeping you safe by staying silent, by pretending things were okay, but silence isn't protection, it's permission. And I let you down?" A rustle behind her made. Her turn. It was Rufus, padding through the grass. He was older now, slower, the gray in his fur more pronounced. But he walked to her the way he always had, with quiet purpose. He settled beside her, his warm body pressed against her side. Claire reached down and scratched behind his ears. "You never gave up on her," she murmured. "Not once." Rufus let out a soft breath and curled into the grass. He didn't bark, didn't chase squirrels, just watched the trees sway above them, like he too was remembering. Claire sat there for a long time. She thought of the years that had slipped through her fingers, of birthdays uncelebrated, of the sound of Hannah's laugh that she could only now replay in memory. She thought of Nora, of the woman who had once been her closest friend, whose smile had masked something cold and vengeful. And of Derek, the man she once trusted to love their child, whose cowardice had cost them everything. Justice had come, but it didn't bring peace, not completely. Not yet. Still, it was something. She stood slowly, her hand brushing the headstone. "I love you," she said, "always." The clouds above began to part, letting through a pale strip of light. It fell on Hannah's grave like a final blessing. Claire took one last look at the tiara resting in the grass, then turned toward the path. Rufus rose and followed as they walked through the rows of graves. A breeze picked up soft and cool, wrapping around her shoulders like Hannah's tiny arms used to do. Claire closed her eyes just long enough to feel it. Then she opened them again and stepped forward. The past would always walk with her, but at least now it had a name and a grave and a dog still loyal enough to sit beside it.